If we win the league, it'll be mental. I'll be very vocal.
FA Cup City, Premier League Arsenal, Champions League City.
No, I'd back us to beat City over 2 legs again.
But I know there'll be a lot of newer or younger City fans that'll be looking at me thinking, what the hell is this guy talking about?
No, yeah, fine. We're winning the Champions League as well. You've convinced me.
Hello guys, welcome to this episode of the Sportsman Untitled podcast, and it's a huge one we've got for you today because I'm joined by Rory Talks Football, massive Arsenal fan who's come up with some interesting predictions for this podcast, and I'm also joined by Oliver from City Report Pod who has some more sensible predictions, I think. So let's get right into it. A 3-0 win this weekend over Brighton, top of the table now on goal difference after Liverpool's slip up at Old Trafford. How confident are you feeling at this moment in time?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, like, PTSD of last season. Don't want to get too carried away, but you can't not be confident. You know, the performances we're putting in, 10 wins, 1 draw at the Etihad in our last 11 games. And the way we beat Brighton, you're like, well, if we just play like that for another 7 games, we've won it. So, confident, but cautious.
Ollie, were you just giggling there thinking about last season?
Yes. It's not just Arsenal. I think it's a syndrome that affects every team that City are chasing, isn't it? It's I think City have garnered a reputation over the last few years of being utterly ruthless and relentless in coming in, start running. And teams are aware, they know that one slip and City can be all over you. Liverpool have experienced it, Arsenal have experienced it, Man United experienced it well over 10 years ago now in 2012. I think they were 8 points ahead with 5 games to go. So it's a good reputation to have when you are chasing because the nerves will absolutely be kicking in. And I think we've seen a bit of a Liverpool head loss in the last 24 hours or so after their draw against United because they've got City up their backsides. And now there's obviously a 3-horse race, which is refreshing, but adds an extra element of nerves. But yeah, I think Arsenal are going to have to be relentless because of what happened last season in particular.
And let's talk about City's comeback win against Palace. Very impressive. In particular, it felt like De Bruyne's best game in a little while. Obviously, 2 incredible goals from him. Do you feel like he's back to his best at the perfect time this season?
It's too early to say. It's hard to say about back to his best. I think at this point now, the Foden versus De Bruyne debate is as much about tactical advantage as it is about who's the better player, who's suited better, who's performing best on the pitch. I think De Bruyne is by far and away the best in the world still, particularly for City when there is space to play with the ball, space to drive through midfield, space to pass into behind the defensive lines, space to shoot. Phil Foden's a different player in that sense. He works very well in the pockets. He works very well when there's not much space to play with. So I think De Bruyne being back to his best isn't really the concern because KDB pulling a 7 out of 10 is still better than the vast majority of players in the Premier League. It's who's going to be suited to what game, and can Pep, which I'm obviously confident he will, can Pep choose the right player for the right situation?
I want to get the Arsenal point of view on City at the moment because I was looking at their results. I don't think they've lost in any competition since early December, which is just remarkable. Yet it still feels, maybe it's because they're down in third and Liverpool and Arsenal have shared the top. It still feels like they're kind of lurking in the shadows and not getting talked about as much. Is that how you feel, Rory?
Yeah, they are stealthily kind of just there and they're not really dropping points. Obviously, we got a draw against them, but I do still feel like they look more vulnerable than last year. I don't think they're in that kind of flow state that they hit at the end of last season that we've seen a lot before where, there's not even a doubt that they're going to win every game. Against Palace, conceding early on, they could have gone 2-0 down if Palace had capitalised on a good chance. So it's kind of like, I do still think there are points to be dropped. I'm not convinced that any of the teams go 7 wins out of 7 in the final 7, but you just know that they're probably just going to build momentum from here, and it's about keeping ahead of that.
Do you like being the kind of the chaser? It was kind of the same last season with Arsenal. Obviously, we've had the seasons where you've run away with the title. Yeah. Do you quite like being in this position, ready to strike, or would you rather be, clear at the top?
No, I think it quite suits us to be chasing again because of that reputation that we have got, but the other side of it is that you're fully aware that if the other club that you're chasing with can maintain their form and can keep picking up 3 points, then we're in a bad place. Would I rather be chasing? Maybe the wrong way to put it to say I'd rather be chasing. I'm quite content for City to be chasing, knowing that the pressure is there. But I guess it always is nice to have that point ahead of you.
Let's talk about Liverpool after that mad 2-2 draw with Man United. I think in the first half it was a game we were all expecting them to win. Obviously, you two are probably delighted that they slipped up in that game. Arsenal still have to go to Old Trafford this season. But what are your thoughts on Liverpool and how that result could affect them?
Yeah, I think it's a bad result for Liverpool. And not, if they'd gone there and it was a really even game and they'd drawn it, you'd go, okay, difficult place to go. But United were awful. And the game should have been dead and buried by half time. So I think it will feel like a loss. And I think Jurgen Klopp said after the game, if Arsenal turn up and play as we can and United play in the same way, we'll beat them quite comfortably. So I do think it's 2 points dropped. I think, look, for a long time I feel like I've been saying Liverpool look unsustainable. The way they've been winning games, you can't sustain that for 38 games. It got to the 30th game and they were still top of the table and you go, okay, maybe they can actually sustain this. But yeah, I feel like for the first time, it's cost them missing those chances, being a bit vulnerable at the back. It has finally cost them. Will that cause them to spiral a little bit? Maybe they galvanise. I don't know, but they feel like 2 bonus points dropped, I think.
Agree with Ollie.
Yeah, absolutely. United. Sorry, I'm just waving to our United fan producer over there. No, United. They're just not. They're just poor. They are playing this season like a mid-table team that has kind of tripped up, fallen and found themselves in the top 6. It's quite incredible. And I agree on the point about Liverpool's unsustainability as well. Eventually it catches up with you. I think Arsenal were quite similar last season. You weren't quite as good as your points total suggested. You were great, don't get me wrong. Not a point of disrespect here, but they were not as good as the points total suggested. And they certainly weren't 30 games into the season quite as good as City. And eventually that does tell. This season it's a bit different. I think Arsenal's fundamentals are good. They're scoring a lot of goals. They're solid at the back. Saliba and Gabriel were menaces at the Etihad. Whereas Liverpool, the fragilities should, in theory, catch up with them. And maybe that game at Old Trafford was the first sign of that. Because any team in a title race should, at the back end of the season, be going to Old Trafford and winning.
For sure. And I know I've asked you this before a few months ago, Rory, but this Arsenal team feels different to the one last season. I don't know if it's the fact that the wins are coming. This weekend was the perfect example. It felt like a Man City win. Yeah. You go to Brighton, you get the job done. There's no fuss. Last season, it was a bit more of a roller coaster, and I think that might have cost them a bit in the end. Do you feel like it's more business-like this season, isn't it? Yeah,
it does. The corresponding fixture last season was West Ham away, where we went there and we should have won the game, but much like Liverpool, we ended up throwing it, drew to all. I think it was a big moment. Saka, having missed that penalty at West Ham last season, stepping up for the one against Brighton when we had Jorginho on the field, more than capable of taking it himself, but he stepped up, great penalty. It just, you'd expect it, but the squad feels a lot more mature, a lot more experienced. They've been through that once. I think that's a big thing for them to have gone through that as a group. Added someone like Declan Rice to the squad, which I think adds a lot of security. And so it does. It feels, we feel more like City, and it feels more like, we belong here and this is what we're going to do for the next few seasons. Whereas last season, even in the fan base, it was like, well, how are we here? But we'll take it. And so, it's a big improvement and just got to do it 7 more times.
And we want to talk about one of your new signings. You mentioned Rice there, but let's talk about Kai Havertz, who's kind of having a pretty impressive season after all the kind of furore about his signing. What's the view from the Arsenal fan base on him at this moment in time?
Yeah, I think just delighted to see how it's worked out. I think, even the biggest Arteta fan, doubted it for a period at the start. I think when he came in, I'm not sure he was ever meant to be a kind of starting midfielder. I think Partey's injury probably played a factor in that. And you were looking at it going, there are parts to his game where you can see why we've signed him, but we've spent 60 million on a guy who's not really raised to the level of the squad here. Whereas now, and I don't think any fan would have predicted this, but we're in April and you go, Kai Havertz probably one of the first sort of 5 or 6 names on the team sheet. And now you're looking at it going, well, where's Gabriel Jesus going to play? Because it's not going to be through the middle. So it's been massive to see that progression. I think it's a credit to Arteta. And I mean, it's only his first season. So in theory, he's still young as well. I think people forget he's still only 24 years old. Like, he's going to progress. Great option, and he looks really confident, which is big.
He's also got a home European Championships coming up this summer, which could be quite big for his confidence. One man who's not short on confidence is, I don't know how City are doing so well with a League Two striker up front, Erling Haaland. Scored again at the weekend, now 30 and 36 this season, not quite as good as he did last season. What are your thoughts on him and a bit of the criticism he's received this season?
I think a lot of it is to do with expectations. City over the last few years and Haaland over the last few years have both set this insanely high bar. I mean, even just then, right? You were saying Arsenal's win at Brighton was very City-like. You're talking about their form, like City at the back end of the season. I was soaking that up, by the way, and quite enjoying it. But it's true. City have set a bar. Haaland's set a bar for himself, and Haaland's is obscene. It was a goal a game, pretty much, and now he's just under a goal a game, and he's being called a League Two striker. It's crazy. Look. Are there moments where I'm sat there watching City thinking, I'd really like Haaland to drop back a few yards and try and get a bit more involved? Yeah, of course. He's 23 still, 22 or 23. He's got a long way to go in terms of the development of his overall game. He has, of course, missed a few big chances this season, but he's still scoring a hell of a lot of goals. He's by far and away the favourites with the bookies to carry on and go on and win the Golden Boot again. He's a central focus point to this squad, and ultimately Pep Guardiola does no favours, whether it's Kevin De Bruyne, whether it's Erling Haaland. He doesn't play players because of their name. He plays them because they deserve to be in the squad. They're doing the job that he wants them to do, and I have, it should be obvious by now, but I have implicit trust in Pep. So I've got no problems with Haaland. There are always going to be points you can pick out and say this needs to be a bit better, that needs to be a bit better, he needs to be a bit more clinical. But he's probably going to stay in the starting lineup for the rest of the season. He'll be trusted to maybe fire us to another trophy or two or three.
And let's dig into the run-in at the moment. As you say, 7 games left. I was looking at the average opponents' kind of run-in points per games. Arsenal have got the hardest run-in, Rory. I'm sure you're aware of this. Yep. Their opponents have picked up 1.62 points per game. Liverpool, it's 1.5. And Man City have the easiest run-in on paper at 1.43. Arsenal still have to play Villa and Chelsea at home and go to Tottenham and Man United on the road. How are you feeling about those fixtures? Because I think on paper they look difficult, but we've talked about Man United already. Are they potentially easier for Arsenal than first would appear? Yeah,
I think the points totals, because if you look at the teams you could go outside of playing the other title contenders, you've got 4th, 5th and currently 6th. But Villa are not the Villa that we saw in the first half of the season. I think injuries have hampered them. Unai Emery, second half of the season, we've experienced it. He'll be focused on the European competition, so I think they're an easier task. Obviously, we play them next weekend. Douglas Luiz is suspended for it, which is big for us as well. So that one, it's like, okay, difficult on paper, but I don't think it will be as difficult. United, the same. It's that Spurs away game, which I think is, we come off the back of a tough run of fixtures, whilst they have 15 days off. So in that 15 games, I think we play 4 times, including away at Bayern. So that's going to be the big one. And then outside of that, you've got what should be relatively comfortable wins, but you never know because it's a title race. So yeah, look, I think bookies, we're still the third favourites to win it, despite being top of the table. I think that's fair, probably, given the fixtures. And I kind of think it suits us. I think, I don't mind, I'm sure Arsenal players don't mind being the underdogs still whilst being top of the table. So it's the toughest running, but there's really only one game that kind of looks difficult.
And it feels like Spurs are going to have a major say on this title race. You're rolling your eyes already.
Spurs away syndrome for Man City.
Exactly. Yeah. It feels like the most difficult fixture left for Man City. The others seem winnable on paper. We obviously know it's not played on paper. Have you got that fear of Spurs still away?
Always. It's engraved in my skin at this point, the fear of Spurs away. I look at the fixture list at the beginning of every season. I look at the big games, Arsenal home and away, United home and away, Liverpool home and away, and then I look over and I'm thinking, where's our -3 at Spurs? And that's generally how it's tended to go. I made the mistake a couple of years ago of going to Spurs away. I don't know. I mean, we have I was going to say we beat them there recently, but we actually scored to start with, which was nice. I don't know, maybe that's just in our collective psyche at this point as City fans. In reality, it's another Big Six club, it's an away game, it's going to be tough. We should go and win. Again, if we're serious about winning the title, we've got to get over the line there. But yeah, it's a bit of a bogey fixture.
The advantage I think you've got is that it looks like you're going to play them really late in the season. Could be your penultimate game. There is a world in which they've qualified top 4.
Yeah.
They don't have a lot to play for, and conveniently letting you win would help Arsenal not win the title.
I'm not sure.
Look, I don't know if professional players do behave like that, but certainly for the fans. I mean, if you turn up and you're like, okay, if we take points off City, Arsenal only have to beat Everton on the final game of the season to win the league.
Like, so you can throw that around there. It's Arsenal-Everton on the final day, and Liverpool could be in a title race there.
Could do us a favour, yeah, true.
But this is why looking at things like on paper, how many points per game, points per opponent, etc., it's impossible. You've got firstly the psychological pressure on all these teams. City to get 4 in a row, Liverpool for Klopp, Arsenal to pick up their first in 20 years. You've got that. You've got the teams that they're playing. Yeah, Spurs, I'm sure the players will be professional, but you might have 60,000 City fans in the stadium that day effectively. There are so many intangibles and dynamic narratives here that are going to come into play as we go into the back end of the season. City could go out the Champions League, Arsenal could still be in, and maybe
we might play each other twice more.
We could be playing each other. There are so many things yet to happen between now and the end of the season away from the pitch on paper that I think it's just impossible to look at this from a rational difficulty tier point of view for each game, and it's just going to be in that 3-day run up to each fixture, what's going on, what's the table, what's the Champions League looking like. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs, I think.
I did take a look at the Premier League title odds, or you said Arsenal third favourites. They're actually second favourites now. It's Man City at 6-4, Arsenal at 7-4, so basically nothing in it. Liverpool now 9-4. Do you think that's fair to have City favourites at this point from both of your points of view, actually?
No.
That was a nod and a shake of the head.
I can see why we might be seen as favourites. The only reason I wouldn't say that we're favourites is because there are 2 teams ahead of us, one of which has such a far superior goal difference that Arsenal are effectively 2 points ahead of us. The reality in the table is that you've got Arsenal 62, Liverpool 61, City 60, just because of that goal difference. If we were 1 point behind Arsenal and just Arsenal, I'd say, I'd probably make us favourites. But the fact that there's 2 teams there, that's why I wouldn't have us as favourites. I'd probably have us as second. But again, it's a credit to the bar that City have set in these run-ins that we are.
Yeah, I think you are favourites still. I think even though it's a point and goal difference, in theory it's still only one result, because if we draw, we drop 2. Yeah. So unless both of us drop multiple points, goal difference won't impact you. I think Liverpool is an interesting one because, in theory, Arsenal and City are going to be battling it out in the Champions League. Liverpool have relatively easier fixtures in the Europa League. It's not as intense. But it does mean every single week they're going to be, or not every week, but they'll be going Thursday, Sunday. I think a lot of the weekends that are left, they play third, which I think is less favourable if you're always chasing. But I just think City's, they've got the form historically that you just think they could. If City win 7 out of 7, I think they win the league. I don't think Arsenal win 7 out of 7.
Are we favourites in your book? Forget the bookies. Do you think we're favourites?
I don't know. I said yesterday no. After the Brighton result, I was like, no, because we look like a better team than you. Like, even off the back of your Palace game, our Brighton game. No, do you know what? We're favourites in my head.
There we go. Bit of confidence.
But logically,
you can see where they come from. Right, let's finish the Premier League chat before we dive into some Champions League preview action. How does it finish? Top 3. You kind of hinted at it there. 7 games to go. How does it finish?
I'm going to go Arsenal, City, Liverpool, with City to pick up the FA Cup and Champions League.
I've got a big problem for you there. Coventry are winning the FA Cup this season. I've told you this before, and now it's semi-final stage, and we're going to beat Man United. So it's going to be one hell of a final. I'll see you there. Rory?
Yeah, why not? Arsenal, City, Liverpool.
So you both think Arsenal are going to win the league? Why are Arsenal going to outdo City? You think Do you think they'll go 7 for 7 then?
I don't think they'll go 7 for 7. I don't think either side will go 7 for 7. But I think City's lack of consistency, again, you said it, we've not quite got into that tempo and that cadence that we've had in previous seasons. We still have a higher ceiling, ultimately. If these two teams, or these three teams, come out and on their day play their best football, there's nobody yet that can match City. The problem is we don't have that consistency, and I think that's going to punish us. But I think we will. I think we will turn it up in the FA Cup, especially if we get United. Coventry's a different conversation, and I think we're capable of doing it in the Champions League again on our day. Not a problem with any team in world football, but over the course of the next 7 games, including Spurs away, all those different dynamics that we talked about, I'm not overly confident that we will see the Premier League season out the way we want to, but I still back us to get a trophy or two.
So, Rory, do you think Arsenal are going to drop points in many or any games from just league games only here?
Yeah, I do think we'll all drop points. I think none of us go 7 for 7, and it's just about who drops the fewest, or if we can just drop the same amount as Liverpool and City, it'll be fine. So I think the only thing that can really slow the momentum we've got down is a big injury, a Rice, a Saliba, a Gabriel. I think that would really disrupt the squad, and we've been lucky so far this season that we've avoided injuries to those players. But I look across the squad this season compared to last season. You're looking at the bench now, and it's like any one of those players, if they came into the starting lineup, I wouldn't be concerned about it. So that's where I think we can handle the physical nature of playing twice a week. I think we're much better prepared to deal with that now. And so keep playing the way that we're playing, and we don't drop more points than City.
This is the thing this season, isn't it? It's we could finish recording, get out of here, see a news piece saying Saliba's injured, and the answers we've just given you will change completely.
I'll have to call you back in.
There are so many things at play, especially again with that third horse in this race. Just so many things at play that any of this can change week to week. It's so hard. It's so hard to call it.
If Arsenal win the league, how are you celebrating?
I'll be at it depends when we win it.
3 games to spare, I reckon.
Yeah, in an ideal world, we win it at Old Trafford. But I don't know, because also we might still have the Champions League, so we might have to temper things and go for the double. But no, if we win the league, it'll be mental. I'll be very vocal for a long time.
If you win at Old Trafford, I'll be there celebrating with you.
Yeah.
Right, let's turn our attention to the Champions League. It's back, the quarterfinals this midweek. Let's start with Bayern versus Arsenal, or Arsenal-Bayern in the first leg, of course. Bayern Munich are dreadful at the minute. They've lost their last 2 league games. They've pretty much conceded the Bundesliga title for the first time in a decade. Thomas Tuchel doesn't look to have much control there at the minute. Rory, you must be licking your lips at this opponent.
Yeah, it does feel like, you go, Bayern, it could have been an easier draw, but if we're ever going to beat Bayern in the knockout stages of the Champions League, I think this is the year. They're in disarray. I think they've got some injuries that are going to be problematic for them. And like you said, their form in the league has been very poor. And I think it's a big thing for us to get the home leg first. We've got the home leg. They've got no away fans. Well, I'm sure they'll smuggle a few people in, but they haven't got the proper away support. And if we beat them, which we should do at home, I then look at the performances we've put in at the Etihad. If we take a lead away to Germany, I think we win the tie. I think we can batten down the hatches and play out a draw in Germany. So, it's a good time to play them. The only slight concern is just that they've only got the Champions League to focus on now. It's a way they can kind of redeem the season with the fans. And Thomas Tuchel is a bit of a cup specialist. So, it's not going to be easy. It's a first for most of our players being in a Champions League quarter-final. But pretty confident going into it.
Ollie, how do you see this one from an outsider's perspective? You fancy Arsenal?
It's hard to say, because what City dealt with in their first few years of the Champions League, with that squad being new to the competition, most of the squad, Arsenal are going to be dealing with the same thing. This is all very new. Everyone knows, infamously, it's taken us a number of tries to eventually, firstly even get to the final and then win it, with some shocking knockouts along the way. Arsenal are up against that psychologically. Are they in a good spot right now, momentum-wise? Yeah. Bayern in a bad spot, of course. But you've got that heritage, and unfortunately it does in a sense come into play. We've seen it up close with Madrid's heritage in that competition. It's going to be tough. It's hard to call, and I think the fact that you've got to go to Germany's second leg is a bit of a killer. So I'm looking forward to this. It's a shame that we're on the same night, because I'd love to be watching it.
Very annoying that I can't watch both. Yeah. But no, I do agree to an extent. I think the Porto game, the whole Porto tie fell within this kind of run that we're on, where in the Premier League we've been dominant, but that, it took us to penalties, and I do think there were players in both legs that looked a bit shaky. Saliba, I didn't think had a great game in either leg. So, yeah, there's definitely a chance that we do turn up and rabbit in the headlights kind of cost ourselves, but you think it's in our hands. If we turn up and play the way that we have been in the Premier League, we should win it.
Do you think there's any sort of hangover? Obviously, there were those consecutive years that Bayern just kept knocking Arsenal out in the last 16. Is there any kind of hangover there, or is it just in the fans' mind? Because this is a very different Arsenal team and a very different Bayern Munich team. Yeah,
I don't think so. I mean, look, a couple of those Bayern players are still there, which is impressive. But from our perspective, it's a whole new squad. It's a new manager. It's a lot of new fans that might not even really have been that active following the club back then. So I don't think it shouldn't affect us mentally. And I think we've done we fixed a lot of those kind of, how long it was since we'd won at Old Trafford, how long it was since we'd won at Anfield, stuff like that. So I feel like that shouldn't be much of an impact. Maybe on some of the fans. But
just got 2 words left to say on this game. Harry Kane.
Yeah.
Rory is back. This feels like if he wasn't playing for Bayern Munich at this moment in time, I feel like the scales would be far more weighted in Arsenal's favour. But he's got this brilliant goal-scoring record against Arsenal. He's scored quite a few at the Emirates. And, I mean, he's brilliant, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. But I do feel like Saliba and Gabriel as a partnership, when we come up against those kind of individual strikers, whether it's Haaland with City, we've really done a good job of nullifying them. So it's more about, for me, the supply that he gets. I look at Musiala, whichever side he plays on, I think he's going to be a real threat. He's such a good dribbler of the ball. So I think it's more about whether they can get the ball to Kane in the position to score, rather than a moment of individual Kane brilliance. But yeah, it just adds another layer of jeopardy, because if we get knocked out, it's one thing. If we get knocked out because of Kane, that's a whole other can of worms that I don't want to think about.
Maybe he will finally win a trophy this season. It'll be pretty brutal for Arsenal. Ollie, these are obviously going to be Manchester City or Real Madrid semi-final opponents. I know you don't want to look past Real Madrid. It's very hard not to. But would you have a preference on who you'd rather go through and play in the semi-final?
Of course, Bayern. Yeah, undoubtedly. Not only because of the current momentum of the two teams, but we did a number on Bayern last season, as we did on Real Madrid. And City don't have a good record against domestic opponents in the Champions League. We've gone out in horrendous circumstances against Tottenham. We've gone out against Liverpool. We obviously got beat in the final by Chelsea. We just do not have a good record against English sides in the Champions League. So if we are going to play Arsenal, I was glad it wasn't this round. I think similar to almost last season, personally, I wanted us to face Arsenal, if it was going to happen, as late as possible, when that pressure and lack of experience has built to kind of a critical mass within the Arsenal team versus City, who've now been there and done it. But if it was up to me, I'd much rather be facing Bayern in that semi.
First up, let's talk about the Real Madrid quarter-final, because it's you played them twice in the last 2 semi-finals, obviously lost one in dramatic circumstances again at the Bernabeu, hammered them last season. How do you feel about this version of Real Madrid coming up against City?
It's a funny one, because even when we did go out a couple of seasons ago to them with those late goals, we were still the better side. We were still the better. That was kind of City Champions League syndrome coming back into play. And last season, that first half against Real in the second leg at home, best 45 minutes of football I've ever seen. Hands down. We absolutely tore them apart. I think that will be lingering in their minds now. Psychologically, we're at a level. The problem is potentially on the pitch. Kyle Walker not being available for this first leg against Vinicius Junior. That is that's dangerous, right? That's really dangerous. Plus, we might see Rico. Listen, I back Rico to the hilt. Fantastic lad. He's an unbelievable player. Can he deal with somebody like Vinicius Junior to the extent Kyle Walker can? Don't know. It's going to be tough. So, look, I've got to back us simply for the fact that, again, I think we do have the higher ceiling. I think we are, on balance, a better side than Madrid. We've eliminated those psychological barriers that we've had in the past against European giants. But Madrid are still Madrid, and they could pull something out of the hat. So, but what I'll say is a reverse of you. Second leg at the Etihad, that place is fire. Like, honestly, I know people have a lot to say about the atmosphere at the Etihad, but when it comes to a Champions League second leg at the Etihad, whoever we're against, that place is an inferno. I think last year there was a Spanish journalist, a Madrid journalist, that wrote after the game. He said the players walked into a trap at the Etihad. The Madrid players walked into a trap, referring to the atmosphere. We're going to have that again. So whatever happens in Madrid, as long as the tie is within touching distance, yeah, I think we can go and do it.
Madrid are obviously always dangerous in the European Cup, but they only kind of squeaked past RB Leipzig. It was 2-1 on aggregate.
Yeah.
It looks like they've got La Liga title wrapped up. They're a few points clear of Barcelona, and they're in decent form in the league. Rory, how do you feel about Real Madrid at this moment in time? Can they do City?
Yeah, I think they can. I think they can do City by, not necessarily being the better team. I think, this season I actually don't think they've been brilliant. I think the standard in La Liga has been quite poor, which they've capitalised on well. Against Leipzig, I thought Leipzig were the better team across two legs, and really, if they'd been clinical, could probably have gone through. But like Ollie said, it's, you look at Vinicius Junior without Kyle Walker there, it feels like one of those games where City could really outplay Real Madrid for the majority of the time and concede a couple of goals where they've looked vulnerable, against everything, whether it's Mateta for Crystal Palace or whoever it is, they've looked vulnerable on the break. And if there's any team that's going to carve you open on the break, it's going to be this Real Madrid one. So if Madrid win in Madrid, then they can go to the Etihad, set up defensively, where the counter-attack can be even more potent. I could see them doing them, but on paper you say Man City, I think, are the better team, have the better structure, and should, if they've learned from previous seasons, go through.
Sorry, just out of curiosity from an outsider's perspective, say City go to Madrid and lose by 2 goals or 3 goals maybe. Are you still thinking when they come back to the Etihad, yeah, I'd actually quite fancy City to turn them over and go through?
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me. But equally, I think it would be a tough gig just because, you could get 2 goals, say you're 3-0 down, you could get 2 of them back. But Vinicius is going to be there. Yeah.
I think Real Madrid are likely to score on the counter, especially if City are chasing a game in that sense.
Walker going to be fit for the second leg?
For the second leg, I think he will be, but the first leg, it looks like he's out. I just look at us in the Champions League now. I think we've built our own reputation at the Etihad for just being able to pull almost anything off. I mean, we were half of Sterling's leg away from turning over a big deficit against Tottenham a few years back. And if we were at Madrid for the second leg, I'd be a hell of a lot less confident, but we're not, and I think we're capable of doing anything at home. Like if we lose 3-0 at the Bernabeu, I'm still going into the Etihad with that no defeatist mindset whatsoever, that we can still do it. I think that's huge for a club to have in the Champions League at this stage.
I want to talk about star quality as well in the Champions League. Obviously, you've got Mbappe and PSG on the other half of the draw, and we'll come to that in a bit. But Real Madrid have star quality. We talked about Vinicius. They've got Jude Bellingham, arguably 2 of the best players in Europe. How do you feel City have coped coming up against sort of the big stars of world football recently? And obviously, do they scare you heading into this one?
They only scare me because we perhaps lack the tools, Kyle Walker, to deal with them. But Jude Bellingham, Rodri, right? You can name almost any player and we've got an answer to it. We've faced some of these star personalities over the last few years. Benzema, again, I don't think we were necessarily the worst side. It was what happened. But when you talk about star quality, we've got some of the biggest of them all. We've got Haaland, we've got Foden, we've got De Bruyne, we've got Ruben Dias at the back. John Stones, the way he moves into midfield. Rodri 3 times over. I think we have an answer to it, and I try and look at this from an outsider's perspective again, without trying to be arrogant, but I think they are looking at this City team with more fear of our star personalities than we are of theirs.
I think Man City are probably, and champions, unquestionably the best team in Europe, if you're looking at the odds as well going into it. Rory, I want to get your view on this. Are Real Madrid the second best team in Europe, or would you throw Arsenal in there as well?
I'd throw, in terms of the way the teams are playing at the moment, I'd have to throw Arsenal in there by nature of the fact that I think we've been better than City this season in the Premier League. But Real Madrid are Real Madrid. They've just got that ridiculous pedigree in the Champions League. I think in terms of star quality, I think they've got individual players that can win you those games that we don't have to the same degree. So I think that puts them, just ever so slightly above Arsenal.
It felt like before the draw was made, this was talked about as a potential final. We're getting it in the quarterfinals. Same question as I asked Ollie. Who would you rather play in the semis, Real Madrid or Man City?
100% Real Madrid. I think for pretty much every reason, I think it's a better spectacle. I think it's, for Arsenal fans, we play City enough. To be honest, the times that we've played City recently, they've been really dull games. I think that the way that we'd set up against Real Madrid would be very different, and ultimately I think we'd have a better chance of beating Real Madrid over 2 legs. So the ideal world, if we get past Bayern, is that we face Real Madrid, and at that point, even though I've just said Real Madrid probably slightly above us, I'd probably back us to win the Champions League if we got past Bayern and had avoided City in the next round.
I'm fairly surprised by that answer.
Yeah,
I'll tell you why, because you talk about Arsenal having this psychological barrier that City had, took a few years to get past. Surely you'd rather a more familiar opponent than this glamorous European giant with the pedigree, with the history.
Especially if Real Madrid beat City. Imagine what they'll be like. It's a gargantuan.
Maybe it's wrong, because while we were still dealing with that, we were still going out to domestic opponents. There wasn't really a better option for us. We just seemed to lose and get knocked out whoever we were playing. But I'm kind of surprised by your answer in a sense.
I just think the way that we set up, I think just in terms of styles make fights and stuff, I think the style of play that we have, I just think would work well against Real Madrid. Like the way that RB Leipzig played against them, I can see us setting up in a similar way. And then I look at City and I go, is Arteta going to, we got the better of you in the Community Shield, we've got the better of you in the Premier League, is Arteta going to get the better of you across 5 games in the Premier League? And if he does, questions have to start being asked about Pep versus Arteta.
Come on now.
But,
well, you've both said that you fancy your chances in the quarterfinals, so we can kind of map out a tournament tree here. You've also both said that you don't want to face each other in the semi-finals. Let's talk about quickly the other half of the draw. Who do we think is going to make it to the final out of those 4 teams? We've got, if I can remember, Dortmund, Barcelona, Atletico Madrid, and PSG, of course. I think PSG with Mbappe might go to the final this year, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, you go, it should be PSG or Barca because they play against each other. The winner of that plays Atletico or Dortmund. You'd back them in that, but I've got a weird feeling that Atletico, despite arguably of those 4 teams, being the 3rd or 4th highest quality team, I've just got a feeling they turn up and Simeone their way to the final.
Yeah, you write him off at your peril, Diogo.
Exactly, it wouldn't surprise me at all. So I think they beat Dortmund, not easily, but I think they beat Dortmund by nature. And then, just look at it and you go, come up against PSG and Barca. I've got a feeling they do it, but we'll see.
I've not even looked at that side of the tree. It's similar to last season in a sense. It's like we're so laser focused on what we've got to deal with over on this side that we'd be fools to even take a glance over there. But if I've got to call one of them out, I'm going to back Atletico Madrid, actually. I think it's going to be a scrappy side of the draw in a sense. But again, Barcelona have some pedigree, although they've been a bit of a shambles domestically recently. I'll hedge my bets on Atletico.
Okay.
Yeah, quite fancy it. And PSG are really prone to kind of collapsing under the weight of the expectation that they have every year. I'm not being funny. They had Neymar, Mbappe, and Messi, and they still couldn't get there. So I'll go for Atletico.
There's an outside possibility that Mbappe plays his last game for PSG against Real Madrid in the Champions League final. But these 2 teams have something to say about that, right? We think we might get an Arsenal-Man City semi-final. if both teams progress. What impact will that have on the Premier League? Could it help Liverpool? And would you fancy your chances at beating, Arsenal in Europe and Man City in Europe?
Want me to go? If it was a 2-horse race, City Arsenal, I will say the winner of that tie will also win the Premier League, purely for the damage that it'll do to the momentum of the other side. Will it benefit Liverpool? I think they'll be looking at that if the semi-final happens, and they'll be thinking, yeah, this is quite handy for us. If Liverpool can stay in the race that long, then it's going to be a boost to them. And again, if it does happen, I think whoever loses that tie is really going to suffer in the Premier League as well. So if Liverpool are still knocking around, it's going to be Liverpool and the winner of that tie. If Liverpool are no longer in the race, I'm going to back whoever wins that tie to go on and win the Premier League as well.
What about you, Rory?
Yeah, I mean, it does help Liverpool. I think just either of us progressing helps Liverpool anyway. In a way, it's less helpful to Liverpool if we play against each other in the sense that there's no travelling. I think they'd play out more like Premier League games. I don't think they'd necessarily have that incredible kind of back and forth Champions League nature, whereas if we play against Real Madrid, I think that could definitely go that way. So, in some ways it could work out better. But I do agree psychologically, if you get knocked out by your title rival, it could be quite a blow. So, yeah, I think I'd back us to beat them. I'd back us to beat City over 2 legs again.
Second leg at the Etihad.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll just pitch up and take a 0-0. No problem.
I fancy us.
In what way you think that the Etihad will just, like you said against Real Madrid, will just play the same factor? Yeah. Okay, interesting. Right. Well, we'll finish this podcast with the final prediction. Who's going to win the Champions League this season? If we think Atletico Madrid are waiting in the final, that could be a tricky one. That'd be an awful game. Rory, let's start with you. You've just said you fancy you to beat Bayern Munich. You've just said you fancy Arsenal to beat Man City. So surely there's only one answer here. Arsenal's first European Cup.
Yeah, we're doing the double. I think we're not. No, even though I just said I think we'd beat City over 2 legs, realistically, I think City win the Champions League. Which is contradictory. Yeah, I don't know. My head's all over the place, to be honest, because I keep watching us play and I'm like, we're the best team. We are the best team at the moment, but
back 'em.
But last season's just damaged me long term. So no, yeah, fine. We're winning the Champions League as well. You've convinced me.
Good.
Yeah.
Ollie.
City. Okay. City, definitely. Same again. I still think on our day we're the best team. I think, the fact that we're at the Etihad second leg and we are capable of anything at home in these ties, the fact that we've done it now and we're over those psychological barriers of domestic opponents or Madrid or whoever it is, back us. Premier League, not so much. Like I said, I think if I had to put my head on the chopping block and gun to my head what is going to happen this season, FA Cup City, Premier League Arsenal, Champions League City. So that's where I'll park it. But again, viewers' discretion before I take pelters because everything changes in a week's time. Yeah. This is so fluid, this situation with Liverpool, City, Arsenal, Champions League, Premier League, FA Cup. Who knows? But right now, as things stand, I have to back City for the Champions League. So
if you don't think you're going to do another treble, so the options, you get the FA Cup and then it's either Premier League or Champions League, would you rather do the four-peat with the Champions League, with the Premier League, or would you rather the Champions League? Which is back-to-back Champions Leagues, but Real Madrid have done better than that before, whereas the four-peat would be a brand new achievement.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I would probably go with the Premier League. I've sometimes, to the confusion and surprise of other fans, my pals that are Liverpool fans, United fans, I've always been a Premier League first kind of person. I think Premier League is your bread and butter. In a sense, I think it can be quite hollow to win the Champions League and not win your domestic division. I think about when Chelsea beat us in the final. Where did they finish that season in the Premier League? 7th, maybe?
Yeah.
6th or 7th? Yeah. I think it's a little bit hollow. I think the Premier League is your bread and butter. That's where you assert dominance over the rest of your domestic opponents. And then you've got to go on and win the Champions League after that. Plus, as you said, a four-peat, never been done before. So
there's also the narrative with the Premier League of stopping Klopp in his last season and stopping Arsenal winning their first in 20 years, whereas I don't think the Champions League has that same weight because you won it last year.
Yeah, I agree. Personally, I will still go with the Premier League, but I know there'll be a lot of newer or younger City fans that'll be looking at me thinking, what the hell is this guy talking about? But Premier League for me every time, and then you've got to go on and do the European title.
I'll throw a spanner in the works and say I think Atletico Madrid can win the Champions League this year, because
for sure.
You've convinced me that they're probably the most difficult side on that half of the draw, and I also think if you're not playing them over 2 legs in the final, we saw Inter Milan come quite close to beating City in last year's final.
Yeah,
I think they're probably the team. If I was an Arsenal or a Man City fan, I'd want them out as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'm more concerned about Atletico than the other 3. Absolutely. Can I swear on here?
Yeah.
Not sure? You can bleep it out if not. I think Atletico are capable of shithousing their way through a final.
I was also going to use that term. But
we've played against Atletico in the I think was it maybe quarterfinals or last 16. In the end, we got the better of them, and the heads fell off, as they are liable to do. I think Stefan Savic, you might remember. I think it was in our run to the final, actually, against Chelsea. Stefan Savic completely lost his head. Simeone lost his head. But they are certainly the most capable of causing trouble for a better side, whether it is City or Arsenal. They're the ones that could spring a surprise in a final. So, yeah, I don't want them.
So just to round off, Rory, we've had Ollie's FA Cup, Champions League, Premier League winners. Could I get the same from you, and we'll finish it there?
Fine. City FA Cup, Arsenal Champions League and Premier League.
What a way to finish that is. I mean, Arsenal doing the double.
Yeah.
Would that be better than the Invincible season? I put him on the spot again.
It would be a better achievement. Not necessarily a harder achievement, but a better achievement, because ultimately we've never done the Champions League before, and it would be the first, so yes.
We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me, Rory and Ollie. I'm sure we'll see you back soon in a few weeks when the pressure's even more on both of your teams. Thanks very much.